Hello and welcome to Michael's Minty Music for today. Today we review Guns N' Roses' most recent 2008 album, Chinese Democracy. It took a while to make. There was a lot of mess with this album behind the scenes. But as it took them about 15 years, it was highly anticipated when it finally did come out. And, with albums that come out after a while like this, that are really long, that they were working on it for that amount of time, it's pretty good, actually. It's not really the mess that it was made out to be, but it is definitely not the sort of perfect labor of love that they spent 15 years on. It is just pretty good. It's not really anything spectacular. This is the track listing, and these are the tracks that added to my playlist, 6 out of 14. This album is definitely good, but I wouldn't say it's great. There's a lot of different stuff here in terms of styles and sounds, which is definitely a positive, but the album doesn't really have a distinctive sound. I feel it's got sort of callbacks to the earlier Guns N' Roses sound, which is probably the closest to a distinct sound, but it doesn't really sound great in the modern context. Even updated Guns N' Roses sounds a bit outdated for 2008, in my opinion. So it's kind of like this weird sort of conflict between older, late 90s or late 80s, early 90s rock and modern music. Modern pop music, I guess, kind of modern rock pop for 2008. But this album does have a couple of pretty good songs on it. The title track is pretty good. Most of the songs here are at least listenable, and some of them are definitely a good listen. So the album does get slowly more and more boring, in my opinion. The back half is kind of medium, and tracks in 6 and 7 both feel really long by the time you're like halfway through. It's like that's actually a lot of tracks on here. This album kind of has an overproduction problem, I will say, which is to be expected as they took 15 years to make it. But overall, the album flows alright, but not great. Now, there was only one single released before the album, and that was the title track, Chinese Democracy. But my favorite song here is probably Better. It's got hard rock, but also goes into sort of more pop-oriented stuff occasionally, and it's got some interesting synth. This is one of the few songs I think on the album that the production really makes the song better and doesn't just sort of extend it. So I think that Better comes together the best off of the album as a single song. Now, I rank this album third out of all of Guns N' Roses albums, only under the two Use Your Illusions. It's definitely not as good as those two, although it isn't that far behind in my opinion. Use Your Illusion 1 and 2 just are more distinct and have better songs on them. Chinese Democracy has sort of the production value to fight with them and compete for that spot, but it just doesn't get there. Now, I do think that this album is a lot more polished and musically diverse than Appetite for Destruction. But I do think it definitely occupies a sort of in-between where they've got a good idea and they've got a lot of different sounds, but they don't put it together as well as Use Your Illusion. So Chinese Democracy, I feel, is a good spot. That's a good spot to put it in. However, this album doesn't take my top spot from 2008. That stays with Pink's album Funhouse, which is probably only a little bit better than this album. It was closer than I expected. Chinese Democracy, I will say, definitely competes for the top spot, but Funhouse, I think, is just, it's got a more distinct sound. It's just not as overproduced. It doesn't get as boring, and this is one of the few times where the shorter album can take advantage of that, because Chinese Democracy is really quite overproduced. So Funhouse keeps it for 2008. Next up is ABBA's 1977 album called ABBA the Album, which isn't confusing at all, but anyway, it's a great album, so stay tuned for that, and stay minty.